critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, a very warm welcome back to the Muckrakers. I'm joined by the brilliant Andrew Bridgen and also James Freeman. And Andrew was just telling me in the break about the scandal, and it is a scandal, about what happened in the elections. And he was talking about his proudest moments, which we're going to revisit before the end of the show. But before all of that, the question is monkeypox. Is the K silent? Is it really just all about money? It's been renamed Mpox, as in M people and various other things. The WHO declaration. Basically, they've declared Mpox an upsurge in the Democratic Republic of Congo and other African countries, and they've called it a public health emergency of international concern, a PHEIC, under the International Health Regulations of 2005. There's been an emergency committee review, and it follows advice from them. They met on the 14th of August, just a few days ago. They reviewed the data and assessed the latest situation. There's also been a new variant. There's always a new variant of these viruses called Clade 1b, and you're going to hear a lot about that, and that's contributed to that sort of side. As always, we should point out there is no confirmed cases of Clade Mpox in the UK, but there have been reported in Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda and Uganda, which is the first Mpox cases in these countries. Sweden has also confirmed its first case of Clade 1, with the infected individual contracting it during a stay in an African country where the strain is present. And also in the last few hours, Pakistan has reported its first case, with the person having travelled from Saudi Arabia. Further testing is underway to confirm the specific strain. The response has been quite extraordinary. Andrew, you're very vocal on this, as you have been on a lot of the things that affect us. What's your take on it?
Well, of course, we need to be concerned because Bill Gates, who predicted the COVID-19 pandemic years in advance, he went on the record and said that he thought we'd have another pandemic by 2025. Well, 2025 is not many months away. I think it's amazing that there's a few hundred confirmed deaths with monkeypox in Africa, and we're declaring a public health emergency of international concern at the WHO, a PHEIC, which is pronounced fake, Andrew. Fake. Yeah.
Very good. IHA. I hate acronyms.
That is what it is.
Good.
Well, that's how they do it. It is a fake, and yet we've had hundreds of thousands of people around the world who've been clearly harmed or sadly passed away due to the vaccine harms, and no one wants to talk about it. But there's no money in that, Andrew. There's a lot of money in these vaccines, more experimental vaccines. I mean, there's currently a vaccine trial in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda for a monkeypox vaccine, which is being tested on children between the age of 2 and 12. I fear that whatever they say, that whether the next pandemic is monkeypox or it is avian flu, which they've been trying for years, that they will say that this is a pandemic which is very serious for children, and if you don't take these vaccines and abide by the lockdowns, the pointless lockdowns, the masking and all the restrictions and everything else, you're going to be putting children's health at risk. Because the last pandemic was all about saving Granny. Well, I mean, unfortunately they got rid of Granny in hospital with midazolam and morphine or remdesivir in other parts of the world, and this one's going to be all about the children, whatever the alleged virus is. And I think people should be very sceptical. The WHO have not done an investigation into their recommendations at the last pandemic, and I think there was a litany of disaster. So sure are they that they got everything right. So those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And if we're not careful, we're in for all the disasters that we had during the last pandemic and the economic and mental health and health mayhem that caused.
No, you're absolutely right. And we always say that the reason history repeats itself is because we don't learn those lessons from history. James?
I don't know this. We haven't learned the lessons, Andrew. I don't think enough of the public have heeded the warnings, actually, because this isn't a mistake. This isn't a mistake. I mean, the whole EU treaty that's been set up, what that's actually about, it wasn't about sort of forcing people injections. I think that was a red herring. I think that's what the leading sort of analysts are saying now. What that treaty is is an international framework for a whole new global trade in these new pharmaceuticals like vaccines, etc., and other vaccines as well. And I think people should be really, really worried about it because, you know, there's many aspects to this. There is the actual the pushing of the vaccines, but also it's not coincidence that new laws are being brought in across Europe to stop us warning the public, like the Digital Services Act, like the Online Safety Bill. In France, in February this year, they've just introduced a law which prohibits using pressure, manipulation and biased info, whoever gets to decide that, to advocate abandoning proven, again, who gets to decide what the word proven means, medical treatments and protective medical drugs and things. So there is, if you look at all of the signs on what's going on, I think it is clear we're going to see another pandemic. They've learned the lessons, Andrew, not the public or the warnings. They've learned the lessons from last time, and they realise that one of the things they've got to do this time is control the media much, much stronger. And obviously, that's why we're seeing these new laws. This whole focus on extreme misogyny in the UK is another example of sort of attacking people for their beliefs and thoughts. This is the way everything's going. And I think the public should be alarmed, very, very alarmed at what's going on.
But the important thing, as you say, is not to shut down debate. And it's Edward Bernays, the father of PR, he said that the best way to control people is through fear. It's the most powerful human emotion. You see all these images and so on and so forth. What's your take on that, Andrew?
Oh, that's been learnt. The nudge department in the government was brought in by David Cameron around, I think, 2013, the psychological nudge department. And what we saw was that on steroids during the pandemic. The nudge department, I accused them in Parliament of, it's now become the shove department, and I don't like you shoving my people around. But that's the messaging. The government or governments around the world also know that that poor, impoverished, ill, poorly educated, scared people are far easier to control than other people. And that's, unfortunately, through measures of various governments, that appears to be the direction of travel. And I also think it's extremely worrying, that announcement that came out of New Zealand a few weeks ago with regarding to police measures in emergencies, which effectively means that the police will be able to hold you down while you were jabbed with a recommended vaccine in the event of an emergency, such as a pandemic. But of course, our governments are going to, I believe, sign up to the WHO pandemic treaty and the amendments to international health regulations. So they'll be able to say that when the restrictions and the mandates are placed upon us at the next pandemic, that it's not them, it's an international treaty, it's a worldwide pandemic, and it's not them, but they will be implementing it. And in signing up to those agreements, which give away our sovereignty without our permission in a referendum, they are neglecting their duties to protect the interests of those people who voted for them.
No, you make some excellent points. And as I say, I mean, it's really important because we don't want to spread that fear. I mean, the just to put this into perspective, the risk in the UK is currently considered low, but there are preparations underway, including clinicians' awareness, rapid testing, development of protocols for clinical care and prevention. They've also they've issued sort of guidelines as to what it is. Mpox, basically, you get skin rash, pus-filled lesions, fever, headaches, muscle aches, back pain, low energy and swollen lymph nodes, and it can be transmitted through contact with infected individuals or animals. Basically, they advise you to follow NHS guidelines. We talked about Germany, and they're going to start this pilot EU vaccination passport on September the 1st. 2024, this year, just a couple of weeks' time, under the European Vaccination Beyond COVID-19 initiative. The programme will document vaccination and integrate personal health data, increasing state and institutional access to private information. A bit of a worry there. The EU claim versus reality. While the EU claims the initiative empowers citizens, it seems an infringement on individuals' freedoms and privacy. James.
Yeah, this is an organisation, isn't it, called EU, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but it's EU Vabico, which is the European Vaccination Beyond COVID-19 programme.
Yes.
That's the programme that's launching this vaccination card. Basically, they say they're revolutionising vaccine management and ensuring a healthier future for all Europeans. I mean, at the moment, I think I'm in part kind of just rabbit in headlights because I don't know what to do. And Andrew, I'd like to get your view on this. I'm kind of like that, and then just astonishment that this just seems to be being rolled out. This idea of everybody has to have all of these vaccinations now, and it's never, the public have never asked for this. And like I said, I think, with all of the things going on with the DSA, the Digital Services Act, the Online Safety Bill, the fact that protests now is becoming much, much more difficult. Certainly it is in the UK. I know there's a protest organised, I think, for October for the freedom movement. But it really, after what we've just seen, I think it becomes problematic because, you know, the police will start trouble. And of course, that avenue of protesting. So I think at the moment, Andrew, where I sit on all this, I'm genuinely scratching my head how we go about fighting this. And also, Andrew, and I'm talking to Andrew Bridgen now, not Andrew.
Too many Andrews. Yeah.
Is it
never,
too late?
Never too many Andrews.
Is it too late? Because I do fear. I kind of flip between having a priority of warning the public and trying to say we need to do something. You need to wake up, to actually just saying, well, do you know what? It's too late now. I've got to worry about my own family and think about what we do to mitigate all of this. Because it does seem that they've got all of the pieces in place now to drive this forward, Andrew.
Other Andrew, go for it.
Bridgen.
Andrew.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it was very good. It was a nice segue till all of us go in there. I know that, and there's a slight delay. Go for it, Andrew. What do you think?
Well, it's not only Germany who are piloting this. It's being brought in Portugal and Latvia, and I think some other countries as well. And of course, Portugal is the most vaccinated, probably about the same as Iceland. Well, I visited Iceland a few days ago, and they're very compliant. So they've decided to, I think, bring it in the most compliant nations in Europe first, which I think is for a reason to get it in. But I mean, clearly, once this is in position, then you're in a position where if you're not up to date with whatever vaccines your benevolent government decides that you need to take, or the WHO, then you could be refused air travel on public transport, or access to events in the event of a pandemic being called, or even if it's not called, they would have the ability to say, well, you're not playing your part, you're not doing as you're told, so therefore you have to be punished in these by society. I mean, it's got nothing to do, with the Helsinki Agreement or the Nuremberg Code about people should only take medicine with informed consent and without any form of coercion.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, and as they say, the World Economic Forum agenda, basically, the initiative aligns with that, suggesting an agenda for increased surveillance and control. It's all scary stuff. 1984, we were warned about it. What can we do to stop it, Andrew?
Well, before we move on, I just kind of point out that this isn't just about travel. I mean, France during the COVID period suspended 3,000 workers from care homes, hospitals, health centres for refusing to get the shot. Italy imposed it on all workers. It was mandatory. Lots of other countries around the world, we saw this as well. So it's more than just travel, because I think, what we don't want people is to sitting at home is to think, well, I just won't go on foreign holidays. It's actually much, much wider than that. It's about travel within your own country. It's about even the freedom to go out of your home and to go to work. That's what we're talking about here. So it is very worrying.
And you make a point. I mentioned Charlie Mullins, who's been on this show a few times, and famously during that sort of moment, it was no jab, no job, is what he said. And you challenged him, James. You were on that, and we had that sort of viral clip that went out there. And what he was saying, the difficulty they had is they were so dependent on the experts to tell them what would do. And people, if they phoned up for a plumber, that's what they wanted to know. Had they been jobbed? Had they been jabbed? Otherwise, they wouldn't get their job. In the end, he said that nobody lost their job as a result of it, but it's going to be new employees. What's your take, just following up on that then, Andrew? What about this no jab, no job? As James says, it's not just about travel.
That was ludicrous, and quite honestly, any employer who held that threat over employees and force. I mean, indeed, I had not a constituent, but a young man from Leicester who was threatened like that, got the jab, had one Pfizer, immediately had myocarditis, has never been able to work again. A man in his 30s. And of course, then the employer actually said, well, you can't work anymore, so we're getting rid of you, having caused the problem. I mean, there's a very good argument that employer is liable for a huge amount of compensation in any sort of fair interpretation of the law. And I think there's going to be an awful lot of that flying around. But these experts, Andrew, I mean, I think it was actually a Conservative politician, I'm trying to remember this, I think it was, whether it was Michael Gove, said we had enough of experts. That was over the EU referendum. They were wheeling out. I mean, you can always, it's a bit like lawyers. I mean, if you want two opinions, just ask two lawyers and you can get a case going, can't you? And you can do the same with You can do the same with experts, but I mean, we've got to have freedom of speech and we've got to have freedom of thought and expression. And science is always open to interpretation and challenge. And anyone who says that anything's ever settled in science, well, that should be a red flag that should warn people straight away that there's something going on here, because that just isn't the way it works. And I've always stuck with the definition of an expert is X is a has-been, Andrew, and the spurt is a drip under pressure.
Absolutely, I love that. You took the words right out of my mouth. Exactly right. But we have to question. I mean, I always say that trust comes in on foot and leaves on horseback, and our trust in experts must have gone by now. And anybody wheels out, well, we're doing what the experts are saying. That has been their defence. Well, but from a business point of view, it's trivial. Yeah.
The most important thing is finding out who's funding the experts, isn't it, nowadays? I mean, 97% of experts will agree with the person who's funding them.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying beforehand. I mean, follow the money in all of these things, and as they say in monkeypox, the K is silent, as I think you suggested in one of your posts.
Bill Gates says that he makes a 20-fold. It's the best investment he's ever made is vaccines, and he makes a 20-fold return on his money on average. That's quite a return, Andrew, isn't it? You can buy a lot of influence with that.
Oh, absolutely, and I think and what we like to do, as I say, we sort of shine more light and less heat on the subject. It's looking at those facts, and the biggest concern that I have, and you and I have been on various platforms discussing this. The biggest concern I have is when you shut down debate. Because if you shut down debate, it means that you have to be able to hold people's feet to the fire and say, look, hang on, this doesn't quite make sense. We need to be able to ask those questions. James, what's your take on that?
We do need debate, don't we? And they tried to stifle that during COVID. People like me, ordinary people, lots of journalists were actually monitored by the government. I know that because I put in a subject access request, and they were monitoring and producing reports on what I was saying. God knows how many people across the UK they were doing that with. I just fear that like I said, I think they've learned lessons from that, and actually they're going to double down on this next pandemic, wherever it comes. I think Mpox is maybe just going to be a news this week, gone next week. But there's certainly, I think, something coming. That's what they're preparing for. And yeah, it scares the bejesus out of me. It really does. Because, history just tells us it's never, ever the good guys who want to limit free speech. Never. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a conservative, right from the EU, the UN, the WHO, our own governments. At the moment, the priority seems to be trying to close down free speech. And, the government, even though it's not warranted, because look, it's clear that there was a post which was disinformation, which people kind of blame on kicking the violence off. But the government's message should be, even if that had been true, that it had been a Muslim, it doesn't explain the violence. It doesn't sort of, justify it or anything. But yet the government now is going to use this as justification for, it's going to revisit the Online Safety Act. It's going to look at misinformation online. It's clear that all of these things are just being used in order to tighten up. And I think they're preparing for what's coming down the road, because they know either it's a pandemic, or there'll be public unrest about digital ID and these kind of globalist policies. And they're preparing for that, I think. I think that's what's going on here.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and we've spoken publicly about this several times to the extent we're able to, is that it's a troubling shift, isn't it, towards centralised control and erosion of privacy. You justify it, that the means justify the ends. 1984 was sadly a very clear prediction. We're going to do a deeper dive into this, and we're also going to go through Andrew Bridgen's greatest hits, his success as an MP, and we're getting back as an MP straight after these messages.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live